And we're back, guys. If you haven't noticed, I made a little upgrade. That's right, I added shaders. So for this last part, I figured, why not go all out, see how shaders play out in 1.12.2 GregTech Community Edition. Fun fact, steel frames actually work with the shaders. So like these hitboxes, it's actually captured by that. So the GregTech steel frames just look even better. All right, as I promised, and I know many people probably would have skipped the first 5 parts of the base tour, we're gonna actually finally cover the fusion reactors and a little bit of the assembly line, because the assembly line is one of the biggest things that used up a lot of my power. For example, this field generator that I had, the UV field generator that I used to actually, let me just turn that off now. The field generator that I've used to complete the pack was actually 492,000 EU per tick. And for those wondering, I streamed earlier me finishing the pack, so it's all done, it's finished. I put a link below to my channel. You could probably check a VOD for that, but more on that later. So this was 492,000 EU per tick, and you do need 2 of these to get the ultimate battery. And there's several ways to actually get this power. You could use nuclear craft fission reactors. So if you weren't aware, nuclear craft in 1.12.2 actually does have it has compat, so it also does have EU, but it's a little bit wonky in how it is. Even though it says it produces RF, right? It's a 4-to-1 ratio, and it'll output a voltage so similar to how IC2 nuclear reactors work. It'll output a voltage that's the amount divided by 4, but that means in order to power something like the assembly line, you'll need to make a fission reactor, an extremely large fission reactor that produces about 1.6 million RF per tick, or actually closer to 2 million RF per tick, because it has to be closer to 500,000 EU. And then you need to transfer that via cables and make sure machines don't explode and so forth. I decided not to go this route for 2 reasons. One, I thought it was kind of cheaty, right? I just I'm playing this pack because I want to get to learn how GregTech changed, if there are any changes in the 1.12.2 era. So I decided, why not, let's just go the max amount. That, and you also need fusion reactors anyways in the first place, because to craft neutronium, you can only get neutronium from a fusion reactor. So that's how it is. Okay, so let's just explain why you actually need a fusion reactor. Oh my god, these just look so pretty. If you also haven't noticed, I installed a new skylight window just so that I can get better lighting for my reactors. I know I still have torches on the ground, sue me, whatever. I'm close to the end game of the pack anyway. The torches were functional for the most of my playthrough. So let's start off with the first fusion reactor that we had set up. They're just like other GregTech multi-blocks, but they're a lot bigger and a lot more intimidating. But they're kind of similar in that if you go to their uses, how you set them up is available in JEI. The reason why they're different tiers is because first of all, they're comprised of different blocks. Whereas the Fusion Reactor Mark 1 has superconducting coil blocks in it, whereas Mark 2 and Mark 3 have fusion coils. There's 32 coils inside of each fusion reactor, covered by casings, and then you can have a modular amount of how many energy input hatches, and a modular amount of input and output hatches. Once again, these are hatches, so it only takes in really fluids and it only outputs fluids. It also takes in energy, so through the energy input hatches. No solids are involved. Once you form up this multi-block, you can check easily through the fusion reactor uses that it can make a bunch of recipes. However, Mark 1 cannot make all these recipes. How can you tell? Because at the bottom here it says energy to start. This fusion reactor can only take up to Mark 1 can only take up to a max EU of 1.4 million at a buffer to start. So if you want to use a recipe such as neutronium or iridium, let's just use iridium, that takes 3 million EU to jumpstart, you won't be able to do so because this actually maxes out at 1.6 million EU. How do I get 1.6 million? Easy. It's the amount of hatches that are available. So let's actually check. Let's check my ME system, right? Energy input hatch. Let's I don't have an LUV energy input hatch. That's weird. Let's just make one real quick. So the main reason is that for each hatch, as it says in the description of the fusion reactor, adds only about 100k to the total energy buffer. So as you can see right here, it's 1.4 million. You can only add, and by the way, where you can add energy hatches are fixed. I mean, they're modular in the sense that they can either be normal casings, like this LUV machine casing, as I have right here, or you can put in hatches. But you can only have 16, and they have to be at the quote-unquote diagonals of the circular fusion reactor ring. So it'll be going here. And as you remember, it was 1.4 million. Once you add this LUV hatch, right, it forms. And now this reactor has a max capacity of 1.5 million. So that's just like the amount of energy required to start a reaction. Because, you know, the principles of fusion is that you need to consume a large amount of energy to, jumpstart this reaction. And then you need to keep feeding it power in order to keep the reaction going on. It does consume a lot of power. In fact, if I can pull out my spreadsheet that I made for this, and once again, similar to the other spreadsheets, I will also post a link below. But let me just show you the helium plasma. Look at this. The total process to run and fuel a fusion reactor comes out to 124,000 EU per tick. However, the total EU per tick produced in plasma comes to a crazy amount. It comes to about 1.2 million EU per tick. How am I getting that 1.2 million EU per tick? Simple. So if I just look, and this is helium plasma, because you can do various forms of plasma that you can put inside a turbine. Remember how I said how energy dense a plasma turbine is? 82,920 EU. That's per 1 millibucket. And how much are you producing per tick in a fusion reactor? Well, let's just check it out. If you're using, deuterium tritium recipe to make a reactor, it makes 125 millibuckets every 0.8 seconds. That's 16 ticks, right? So you basically have 125, divide that by 16 ticks, that's 7.8 millibuckets being produced. And then you just multiply that by 81,920, that's 640,000. But I showed that it's 1.28 million. How did I get 640,000? Well, it's actually overclocked. So these recipes in a fusion reactor are kind of misleading in JEI because these are not, this is an IV style recipe. You remember what I said when I first started this series on overclocking math? That's the same exact thing because you can't put IV energy input hatches on a fusion reactor. The minimum that a fusion reactor will accept is ludicrous voltage. You can put ZPM hatches on here. You can even put ultra voltage hatches on here. In fact, the Mark III fusion reactor requires only ultra voltage reactors. So it'll always accordingly overclock due to the type of hatches that you put inside the multi-block itself. So this 4096 that's required, that you need to provide EU per tick, that's kind of a misleading number. When you think you're producing enough energy, you're really not. You really need to be producing 16,000 EU per tick. But overall, that's such a small price to pay. 16,000 is so much smaller than 1.28 million. What's bigger than 16,000 is the fuel required for this setup. Because once again, this is every 16 ticks. So you'll need to provide it enough deuterium and enough tritium, right? Enough deuterium, enough tritium every 16 ticks to actually power it. And you have to, you got to feed it constantly. So how do you feed it constantly? Well, you have this. So you can see a little bit of glitching, but I have a centrifuge array. I apologize if it's a little dark for you guys, but this is a centrifuge array and the shaders are kind of bugging out right now as I move around. But tritium is kind of easy. It's just centrifuge deuterium, right? It's a 4-to-1 ratio. So it's basically, think about it's concentrating deuterium to more tritium. Deuterium is also easy itself because that's a 4-to-1 ratio of hydrogen. So it's just concentrating hydrogen. So you basically just need to get a lot of hydrogen for your setup. And hydrogen can just be derived from water when you electrolyze it. So these whole entire arrays that I have dedicated here, it's just all for tritium and deuterium. There's a little bit of jamming that's happening right now. I actually think, for some reason, I actually had hydrogen showing up at the bottom here where I'm highlighting these blocks. for some reason there's a little bit of backwash when it comes to GregTech machines and thermodynamics piping. I'm not sure which mod would be at fault here. It just occasionally happens. I have no idea how to explain it because, as you can see here, I already have these output slots already configured, right? So you can even see by the blue dots. So there's no reason that hydrogen should be ending up here at the bottom. But it's a quick fix. I just occasionally take a wrench, let the hydrogen wash back into the system, right? And then this interface here that I have from Planet Logistics filled with water, and I'll just pump the water back out again with the servo, and these things should start running again, right? And now it's filling up with water. So that's the whole entire first part. If you're wondering how many machines I have, it's roughly, it roughly ended up becoming about, as it says here, it roughly needed about 27 total electrolyzers, and as you can see, these are at EV when I did the math, which leads to a total of 40 deuterium centrifuges down to 16 total tritium centrifuges. If you're wondering, because I said earlier it was a 4-to-1 ratio, why am I actually using 16 versus the 40? Well, that was actually a trickier part, because when you look at the tritium production recipe, it's already overclocked, right? Deuterium is only at 20 EU per tick, so it's at LV, even though it says 8 seconds. This is still 8 seconds, but it's overclocked already. So when you move them up to EV, tritium will technically still take twice as long because it didn't get that extra overclocking benefit tier that deuterium has from overclocking, because it starts at LV, and once again, that starts at MV. Yeah, but as I said, these are amounts that you have, and these are all extreme voltage. So this whole entire setup is roughly taking about 121 EU per tick. In fact, I even have all these turbines, you know, that are powering it, right? So you have the God rays from the shaders mod are pretty intense sometimes. But yeah, as you can see here, this is each of these turbines, they're producing about 19.9 EU per tick. And let me go through the math real quick. So the max a turbine can create is ludicrous voltage, 32,768. The reason why I'm not producing that amount is because in order to get 32,768, you need to have a max rotor holder. A turbine consists of multiple blocks. Primarily, it consists of a rotor holder and a bunch of turbine casing, the actual controller itself, right? Bunch of turbine cases. I can't actually pick the rotor holder. If I try to open this, it kills me. So don't try to access the turbine holder while it's running, guys. That's not a thing you want to be doing. In fact, okay, yeah, so here's my grave. But what I want to show you is, so then what determines the whole, how a turbine performs? Well, it's actually very simple. Okay, so let's back it up. In all multi-block producers, so this is not only limited to the turbine, this is also a part of the diesel engine. The amount of amps it produces outside, how strong the voltage is, whether you blow up a machine or not, depends on your energy output hatch. I could put an ultra voltage output hatch on these turbines, which would be very silly, right? Because it can put up to 4 amps of UV. So this could actually put up to 2 million EU per tick, but that's ridiculous. That's almost a waste because this only produces 19.9K EU per tick. So there's almost no need. And in fact, turbines, like I said before, have a max production of only 32 ludicrous voltage. So you really have no need to actually put more than an energy output hatch insane voltage, right? Because even though, yes, you could put out ludicrous voltage, this can do up to 4 amps. So unless for some reason you would just want to use more transforming up and transforming down, there's really no need to go beyond a ludicrous voltage output hatch. So what I decided was, all right, I'll just do an insane voltage output hatch because remember, this can put up to 32,000 EU per tick, but it'll be spread out over across 4 amps. So now, how did I get the 19,906? Well, once again, I said the max a turbine can produce once it has optimal stats is 32,768. And what determines those optimal stats is going to be the rotor speed, which is determined by the rotor holder, and the rotor efficiency, which is determined by the rotor you have itself. Inside all of these turbines, I have osmium rotors because that was the best rotor I could make at the time. So this osmium rotor has 66% efficiency. Unfortunately, you really can't do much better than that until you get to tritanium. but I was already so close to beating the pack by the time I unlocked titanium turbines that I didn't even care anymore. It didn't really bother to I didn't really bother to upgrade, right? So if I do click on the assembler and I look at titanium turbine rotors, which are made in assemblers, you just need 8 titanium turbine blades. You have an efficiency of 83. So where does the percentages come into play? Well, if you go to a max rotor holder, it doesn't show right now what the max rotor holder is, but a max rotor holder has an RPM of 12,000. I have the next highest, which is a UV rotor holder, which is 10,800 and so forth. So if you have like it goes down by 1,200 for each one. So an ULV rotor holder will have a max RPM of 1,200. And then from there, it's just simple ratios. So I have 32,768. Let's do this way. 10,800 is what my RPM is. The total max RPM, if I have a max rotor holder, is 12,000, right? So that's 0.9. And then I have a rotor efficiency of 0.66. So multiply that by 0.66. And then there's a little bit of rounding errors, but that's how I roughly got to my amount of 19,464. So you can kind of figure out what your output is going to be for various turbines. And here's the other thing. Steam turbines, even large steam turbines right here, because this these plasma turbines have the base same setup and they share the same Java classes as steam turbines and gas turbines. They behave very similarly to plasma turbines. Very, very similar. They also share the same functionalities with rotor holders. And in fact, you can even get up to 32k EU per tick just using a large steam turbine. Same amount of EU as plasma, except plasma lasts forever, right? Whereas steam will just consume almost instantly, and you'll need to have a huge steam throughput. And in fact, I was trying to figure out the math. To get the steam throughput, you need to make a bunch of tungsten steel boilers. And tungsten steel boilers are actually really expensive, which makes sense, but you need 4 GA master circuits for each boiler. Whereas if you just look at a large plasma turbine, you only end up needing 2 master circuits per. Obviously, the fusion reactor is extremely expensive. That's where the bulk of the cost is. But I figured that, look, if this fusion reactor is going to make 1.2 million EU per tick of plasma for me, I might as well go for it. And once again, this was overclocked, right? Because even though it was an insane voltage recipe for helium plasma at 4K EU per tick, this overclocks it automatically to become ludicrous voltage. And you know what? Funny enough, it repeats again as well. So we have the Fusion Reactor Mark II. Now we're getting to the next level of fusion reactors, and you can see here. Let me go to the Fusion Reactor Mark II. You can see here that before, whereas each hatch that you add increases the buffer for 100,000, so that had a max of 1.6 million for a Mark I. Mark II is 200,000. So this can handle recipes that will have a requiring starting EU requirement of 3.2 million. Right, so here I can actually make that iridium I was talking about earlier. I can't make Nequadria. I have to save that for Mark III fusion reactors. And the biggest difference is that a fusion reactor Mark III requires, first of all, requires fusion machine casings, and this pricey part, it requires fusion coils in the center. Fusion coils were pretty easy to automate, but they were just semi-expensive. The biggest problem I had was really making the neutron reflectors and the circuits for each fusion coil. I had highly advised that when you get to fusion coils, you should just probably make them with crystal processor assemblies, because at the time that was just easiest. You can try making them with wetware assemblies if you're insane, but the neural processing units are kind of expensive because of the wetware board and the stem cells. Stem cells are also kind of a pain to get because I didn't really have a large egg farm going on. Where else? So yeah, but going back to the fusion coil, yeah, I would just recommend crystal processor assemblies. Superconducting coil blocks, when you can, just automate superconductor wire as early as possible. You can do it as soon as you get yttrium barium cuprate cables. You can even use niobium titanium wires if you want as well. But I just want to say that superconductor wires are very cheap. It surprised me at how cheap they were. It's just literally some nitrogen, tungsten steel plates, and electric pump. I highly advise using them for most of your late game cabling, and not because, and the main reason why I advise them for your late game cabling is not because it has max voltage, or because it's lossless. Because I mean, even though if this had a loss of 1, I would still use them. They're just amazing. They just have such a high amperage for just how expensive they are. They just perform very well. And plus, they have a rare chance of burning up. They can only burn up if you have a high amperage. So I think that kind of wraps it up. I mean, there's nothing much else left for me to explain, except just saying, you know, Fusion Reactor Mark III covers up more of the recipes. It's just basically an upgraded version of the Mark II. You can see that the recipes here do require americium. So in order to make a Mark III, you are forced to make a Mark II reactor because americium is only made from a fusion reactor. You can't get it anywhere else. You have to combine chrome and lutetium. And in this specific pack, lutetium can actually be gained from processing thorium. So this is why I still actually had this fusion reactor, because the fastest way for me to get lutetium was from processing depleted thorium fuel from nuclear craft, right? So I just had a bunch of thorium that I would compress, throw this into a fission reactor from nuclear craft, and then process that automatically. In fact, I'm basically voiding energy, right? That's all this does. This has an applied energistics 2 export bus that's just creating thorium dust. It pushes it automatically into this fission reactor, which is like literally 40 cells in cryothium. I did this as compact as possible. It's a glorified fuel processor, nothing else. It doesn't really power anything. So yeah, and also another fun part, end rods do look kind of nice with fusion reactors. I guess they're pink, so they kind of match. I'm not gonna make a comment on the coloring. I think pink is still a badass color, so it's completely fine to me. But yeah, I decided to go full out. I added all these hatches on here. And oh, by the way, for fusion reactors, the hatch it decides where to output from is completely random. It doesn't care about pairing where the input hatches are. So you can insert fuel for one reaction pair to this side. Like if I can insert lutetium here and I can insert chrome here. Doesn't care, not a problem. In earlier versions of fusion reactors, you would have to put one at the top and one at the bottom, and then it would output in this output hatch. As you can see here, this reactor isn't really connected to anything because I just use this as a production reactor. My main reactor that I started producing a lot of the plasma from, such as oxygen plasma and helium plasma, was from the Mark II reactor, because at that point I figured, hey, I don't need to make any more plasma. This is all kind of overkill, right? So I just needed to make the Mark II reactors. As you can see here, I added this large plasma turbine. I didn't have a really nice place to put it, and that's just powering the energy input hatches. Another thing, not all energy input hatches need to be powered, and once you start dumping power initially into input hatch, it'll get consumed and it'll be transferred to the buffer of the multi-block controller. So it'll get transferred here, where it says 3.2 million. And then once this buffer fills up, then the buffers for the energy input hatches start to fill up. You can connect all of them. That's completely fine if that's prerogative. You don't get really any benefit for connecting all of them, aside, I guess, from symmetry. And sometimes I need an occasional boost, which is why I have these Nakoda reactors here. They're not nearly as powerful as a plasma turbine. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to know what the deal with the sheep is, you should probably check Feed the Beast Reddit, because I occasionally should post on there. But hopefully you enjoyed my GregTech base tours. I thought this pack was a blast. I played through it entirely. There was a lot of bugs, but the bugs were addressed to the mod pack dev, and the mod dev's credit. They addressed them, they listened to my concerns, and with a little bit of technical know-how on my end, I had a blast. The pack was playable all the way through. I managed to craft the ultimate battery and the max machine hull. This is a great introduction to GregTech. I don't think you could get a better introduction to GregTech in quote-unquote modded Minecraft. Like, this is at 1.12.2. I never thought I would be able to make the fusion reactor again in the modern version of Minecraft. I thought I always had to go back to 1.7.10. There are still features that are somewhat a little bit missing. For example, you don't have functional pumps or covers. You don't have functional covers in GregTech 1.12.2. So I don't know if they're planning to add that. That's why the modpack dev did end up having to add thermal dynamics, right? So that's why they were adding servos for handling most of your piping needs, and also applied energistics too for most of your automation needs. Aside from that, I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to see more of this content, let me know. But for now, I have a mod pack to go finish developing. So I hope you guys stop by again later. And thank you.